My spouse and I celebrated our Massachusetts wedding here in 2009. I, in particular, wanted us to be married in front of that window because they were revolutionaries, both of them, Hannah and John, and I just felt like that was in the spirit of this place.
I like to look at them when I'm contemplating things, when I'm listening to the minister's prayer, during a sermon.
I love the different styles we have. I love the different colors. And I love that people of great means have given this parish the finest and most beautiful artwork they can to help families deal with loss and with transition.
For me, stained glass is a way in which the outside world is momentarily kept in abeyance.
They really contain a very human element. They're very natural. They have a lot of earth tones, and they're not exactly Christian images.
Whenever you lose your own immediate grounding, you have evidence of those points of view of people who came before.
Some of us may be Christian, some of us may be of all different faiths, but that our main cause is the divinity of being human.
Maybe I should start by giving a brief account of why I got into this in the first place. I simply a member of the congregation and got elected to the parish board and was expected to do something useful for the congregation. And Chris Beasley, who was the chair, was a very well-organized, efficient administrator, and he gave me a choice. Do I want to work on the stained glass or do I want to work on the sewage system? So I said, well, since you put it that way, I guess I prefer stained glass. And I'm not an art historian. I knew nothing. I was doing this simply as a form of service. And, but this is a warning to any of you. If you volunteer to do something in this church, it may turn out to be far more interesting than you could possibly imagine. So I ended up hiring a consultant on behalf of the church who took her around the church. She'd never been here. I introduced her to the windows, and I was looking at the church records, and I pointed to the Goddard window here, and I said, this was made by Clayton and Bell. And she turned to me and she said, I don't know who made that window, but it was not Clayton and Bell. So I knew nothing, but I was shocked and realized that I couldn't really continue doing this work unless I felt comfortable with the data, with the information that I was supplying to outsiders. So I felt if I was going to do stained glass, I had to get the facts straight. And that, as I say, I simply began down that road as a form of a congregational service. I was doing this, so I had to do it right. But it just became more and more interesting. The complexities, the levels of interest, the art historical issues, the conservation issues, the technical aspects, how you make a window like this, how you conserve it. These are issues I knew nothing about 20 years ago, but I just got more and more interested, and I had all kinds of reinforcement and help from outside authorities like Virginia Regan, wonderful reinforcement from people in the congregation like Sheila Hussey, who has been a tremendous benefactor and so forth. So I ended up producing this little pamphlet, which has been circulating around for a few years, in which I compiled the facts. I would like to highlight two interrelated themes. First, our sanctuary is of international significance in the history of stained glass. Second, our sanctuary provides insights into the religious thinking of members of this congregation during a 50-year period beginning with the construction of our sanctuary in 1893. In many 19th and 20th century churches, all stained glass windows were made at one time by one company and form part of a single thematic program. Here at First Parish, our windows were created one by one as congregation members engaged with a range of major artists in discussions of techniques and subject matter. This dynamic interaction between innovative stained glass artists and a religiously questioning congregation resulted in a beautiful, diverse, and stimulating space in which to worship. In deciding to build a new sanctuary in the early 1890s, our congregation was energized by new and distinctively American ideas about both architecture and stained glass. The style of our church building is Richardsonian Romanesque, named after Brookline's own H.H. Richardson. Richardson's design for Boston's Trinity Church in Copley Square is the best known expression of his influential new aesthetic. But at the time Trinity Church was constructed in the 1870s, almost all U.S. churches imported all their stained glass windows from Europe. Despite its innovative architecture, and indeed over the objections of members of Trinity's own artistic team, most of Trinity's stained glass windows were also imported. That only European-made windows were to be installed in a major new American building provoked a startling reaction. Being refused permission to embellish this great American edifice with American-made stained glass inspired Trinity's interior muralist, John Lafarge, to begin experiments that would revolutionize architectural stained glass. Instead of simply trying to imitate European stained glass, Lafarge decided to take an entirely different approach. Within a few years, beginning about 1880, American stained glass became established as a technically and aesthetically innovative force that radically transformed stained glass making worldwide. Our congregation welcomed this surge of American creativity, and as a result, our sanctuary, unlike Trinity Church, has entirely American-made stained glass windows, with one exception. First Parish's lone example of Europe's ancient craft is the central panel of our weld window, made by the British firm Clayton & Bell, which also made Trinity's imposing chancel windows. All of our other stained glass, including the side and top sections of the well window, were made in the USA and memorably exemplify two distinct American stained glass styles, the opalescent and the medieval revivalist. Opalescence implies that a piece of glass glows somewhat like an opal with fiery tints deep inside. Glass with different colored particles scattered throughout is called confetti glass. Colors subtly mixed in could produce modulated pastels. Layering or plating glass of different hues expanded the artist's palette. Additional naturalistic effects were produced by using wavy glass called drapery glass that could simulate realistic garments. In a typical opalescent window, old-style surface pigments were applied only to heads, hands, and feet. Brilliantly deployed by its innovator, John Lafarge, as well as by Lafarge's chief rival, Louis Comfort Tiffany, and Lafarge's close collaborator, Sarah Whitman, opalescence was all the rage from around 1880 to 1920. Charming commercial objects such as opalescent lampshades and screens became fashionable. Predictably, the use of opalescent glass for solemn church windows proved to be much more controversial. But our congregation was not afraid to experiment. About half of our First Parish windows can be classified broadly as opalescent. Detractors opposed to the use of opalescent glass for church windows contended that decorative realism could neither enhance architecture nor sustain worship. Such concerns resulted in the emergence of a second wave of American stained glass makers led by Boston's own Charles Connick. Determined to halt the spread of opalescent glass in church sanctuaries, Connick and his followers urged a return to the techniques and values of the 12th century as epitomized by Chartres Cathedral. Connick worked hard to win adherents here at First Parish, and he and his followers secured major commissions here between the 1920s and the 1940s. Thanks to Connick, our most archaic-looking windows are actually our most recent. In one of our latter-day windows by Connick, for example, medieval-style two-dimensional figures are shown suspended in midair. Compare this to the elaborate depth perspective with which steps are portrayed in one of our opalescent windows. Connick also advocated using color symbolically rather than naturalistically. For Connick, white symbolized purity, blue, wisdom, gold, spiritual riches, green, spiritual growth, red, love, violet, humility. Although useful as a guide, dividing our windows into three categories, European, opalescent, and medieval revivalist, cannot do justice to the thought processes and accomplishments of great individual artists. Otto Heinecke, for example, doesn't fit neatly into any of these categories. From a German immigrant family, Heinecke's initial training and influences were Catholic and European, but his mature works patriotically proclaim his American identity. Our Heinecke window portrays two Brookline heroes of the American Revolution, Hannah and John Goddard. Most of Heinecke's major works are in Manhattan, and in 1998 through 1999, our Heinecke window was loaned to a major Manhattan exhibition entitled Glory in Glass. We have 9 windows by the person who is probably the best known of all American stained glass artists, Louis Comfort Tiffany. A particular interest is the opportunity we have here at First Parish to compare early Tiffany with late Tiffany. Our 7 chancel windows are early Tiffany. This group was made after Tiffany's visit to North Africa and shows Islamic influence in his mosaic-like patterning of hundreds of tiny bits of glass, as well as in the prominence he gives to the written word and in his avoidance of any human or animal figures. Sarah Whitman is worthy of special note because we have here in our north transept what I believe to be her final masterpiece. She worked as a commercial graphic designer, was a painter in oils on canvas, and created secular stained glass for libraries, amphitheaters, and private homes. But late in life, she focused on stained glass for sacred spaces, and First Parish offered her the opportunity to make a large-scale religious statement. In addition to being her most deeply felt work of public art, our great Lowell window can also be considered a powerful response to those who, like Connick, contended that heavily plated naturalistic windows could not do justice to religious sensibilities. Connick advocated using single-layer boldly colored glass windows through which religious truths could beam down on fallible human beings. In contrast, Whitman's first parish window manifests an upward yearning sensibility, implying a fragile continuum between what we can see and feel as sense-constrained human beings and larger truths that we can grasp only fleetingly and imperfectly. Whitman urges us to begin with our feet on the ground, look around us, and only then look upward, level upon level. Whitman's Lowell window also answers the charge that opalescent windows are little more than decorative objects like paintings hanging on a wall, and therefore cannot relate to and enhance a building's architecture. Whitman's window is thoughtfully designed to complement our sanctuary's architecture. Indeed, after being commissioned by First Parish's Lowell family to create the window's 3 large lancets, she personally donated the glass elements above, adding Chartres-like heavenly flourishes to complete her architecturally specific window. That Whitman's religious sensibility was congenial to many members of our congregation seems consonant with the congregation's choice of Richardsonian Romanesque architecture with its earth-hugging, low-profile, rounded windows and use of indigenous local materials, including Roxbury pudding stone. An architectural choice deliberately contrasting with the pointed window arches and sky-piercing towers of the perpendicular Gothic style favored by other churches in our area. Whitman's Lowell window also directly connects First Parish to Trinity Church and to her mentor, John Lafarge, in her window's stylistic kinship to the Christ and Majesty window that Lafarge was belatedly permitted to add to Trinity. The point I wish to make with regard to this contrast is that each of these windows has a column in the side lancets, consciously and intentionally connecting the window to the architecture of the building. It's in a transition, so to speak, between the decorative aspect and the architectural aspect. This is a church, this is a window in a building, this is not a picture hanging on a wall. Although formally analogous to Lafarge's Christ and Majesty at Trinity, Whitman's First Parish window is not indebted doctrinally to that window. Any stained glass church window, whatever its technique, can be made more or less sectarian by the choice of subject matter and the inclusion of unambiguous symbols. At First Parish, affirmations of dogma were excluded. Like other Unitarian churches, our congregation specified that windows could draw on Christian tradition, but must not endorse a particular creed. A comparison of 2 windows, one by Tiffany here at First Parish and the other by Lafarge at Trinity, will make clear how Orthodox beliefs were winnowed out here. Both windows portray Mary Magdalene near Jesus' empty tomb on Easter morning. Trinity's church depicts Mary Magdalene knowingly gesturing toward the risen Christ who displays an open hand wounded during his crucifixion, but now miraculously healed. In our window, we see no bodily risen Christ. We see only a puzzled and confused Mary Magdalene and an angel who is trying to help her come to terms with the discovery that Jesus' tomb is empty. That our window does not offer Mary Magdalene assurance about what has happened to Jesus' body is confirmed by the explanation published at the time of our window's dedication in 1920, which identified its theme simply as the return of the soul to God. Our window, in other words, was said to be a parable using the story of Mary Magdalene at the empty tomb of Jesus on Easter morning to remind us how mysterious death always is. In the carefully chosen words of the window's 1920 explanation, the kneeling figure is in the act of drawing a veil away from her face, symbolizing the withdrawal of the veil of the flesh before standing face to face with the power of God. That the kneeling figure is Mary Magdalene was not mentioned. Our Mary Magdalene window is so mysterious that it was bizarrely misidentified when reproduced for sale by the well-known Toronto firm Canada Stained Glass. Around the world, people own reproductions of our window labeled the Brookline Annunciation. Purchasers were assured that the woman with long flowing red hair trying to fathom the meaning of Jesus' empty tomb was the Virgin Mary, learning that following an immaculate conception, she will become the mother of the Son of God. If Canada Stained Glass had done a bit more research about First Parish, they would have realized that an Annunciation window was too doctrinal a subject to have been accepted by this congregation. All of our windows with themes evoking Christian tradition can be similarly interpreted as edifying parables. Our Tiffany window depicting the birth of Jesus is unquestionably a celebration of the miracle of birth. In another of our Christian theme windows, Jesus is a wise teacher instructing children. The New Testament matron Dorcas is portrayed unassumingly caring for children. Our Sir Galahad window honors a Christian knight setting out on a quest, a knight who is best known as a paragon of moral courage, as in Tennyson's reference to Sir Galahad's strength is like the strength of 10 because his heart is pure. A century ago, our predecessors in this congregation knew how to draw on Christian ethical and spiritual traditions for the purpose of promoting virtue in their community and nation without being theologically dogmatic. Working closely with a range of important artists, members of our congregation welcome diversity and a certain amount of controversy. Sound familiar?